Elections, a podcast by EOK Consults where we discuss modern campaigning, strategies, social media, and more on winning the digital ground game. So it's been, what, almost 4 months now since the 2025 Ontario general election. The House has risen for the summer break, and it feels like a good moment, really, to pause and revisit things. We wanted to take this chance to do a bit of a deep dive into the social media and digital campaigning side of that election.
Yeah, there was some really interesting dynamics at play. Just as a quick refresher for everyone listening, the election saw Premier Doug Ford's PCs win a third straight majority. That hasn't happened since, what, 1959?
That's right, a long time. And they actually bumped up their popular vote share to 43%.
Which is pretty significant, even though they did drop 3 seats from 2022.
Meanwhile, the NDP, under Mert Stiles, they held on to official opposition status. But they lost 4 seats, and, well, they ended up quite far behind in the popular vote, in third place. And this is where it gets fascinating, especially if you're watching the numbers. The Liberals, they surged over 10 points ahead of the NDP in popular vote.
A big jump. They got 14 seats, which was 5 more than last time. Enough to get them official party status back, which they hadn't had since 2018.
Right. But the twist, the really big twist, was their leader, Bonnie Crombie, didn't win her own seat.
Yeah, quite the personal blow amidst the party's gains.
So our mission today really is to unpack how social media and digital ad spending figured into all of this. How did it all play out online? We want to look strategically at, the how behind the digital side of the campaign. Okay, let's get into it. The first thing that jumps out is the money. Just the sheer amount spent on digital ads, especially on platforms like Meta, it was flooded.
Absolutely flooded. Across the 4 main parties, the total spend was over $2.17 million.
Wow.
Yeah, a significant sum. But what's really interesting, as you said, is how that money was split up. It wasn't even close to being even.
No, not at all. And the proportions, they tell a story, don't they, about priorities.
They really do. Okay, so look at this. The Ontario Liberals spent $1,432,200.
Wait, over 1.4 million.
Yep. That's a staggering 66%, 2/3 of the total digital ad spend from all 4 parties combined.
66%.
Yeah.
That's a massive commitment to digital.
It really is. It shows they put a huge emphasis on social media as a key battleground. Now, compare that. The Ontario PCs spent $305,500.
Okay, so much less.
Much less. And the Ontario NDP were just behind them at $271,700. The Greens spent $151,900.
So let me get this straight. The Liberals outspent the winning PCs by, what, almost 5 times?
Roughly, yes. Nearly 5-to-1.
And they outspent the NDP, the official opposition, by an even bigger margin.
Significantly bigger.
But the PCs won a majority, and the NDP stayed as the opposition. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Does throwing over $1 million online actually guarantee anything, or is there more to it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $1.4 million question here. It clearly shows that just raw spending isn't the whole story. The Liberals spent massively, yet the PCs won the government. It really underscores that maybe, just maybe, throwing cash at the problem isn't always enough if the strategy isn't quite right or if the goals are just different.
Right. Strategy. That's where this gets really interesting. Beyond just the top-line spending numbers, it wasn't just about how much you spent, but how you spent it, the targeting.
Exactly. Precision versus volume.
Some parties seemed laser-focused, knowing exactly who they wanted to reach and where. Others, well, maybe they cast a wider net.
That's a good way to put it. Let's break down those strategies. The Ontario PCs, for instance, they spent a decent chunk early on, but definitely had a noticeable push later in the campaign.
Right.
Their strategy, you could almost call it spray and pray.
Spray and pray. That sounds a bit broad, maybe a bit unsophisticated.
Well, it sounds that way, but you have to consider their position. They were the incumbents, right? With decent approval, and let's be honest, expectations for voter turnout were pretty low. It ended up being around 45%.
Okay, so maybe they didn't feel the need for super precise persuasion.
Exactly. Their main goal wasn't necessarily changing minds with surgical accuracy. It was more about general brand awareness, reinforcing their presence, reminding their base, keeping the message out there broadly.
A kind of incumbency advantage strategy, then, a luxury the others didn't have.
Precisely. Opposition parties usually need to be much more focused on conversion, on actively winning votes. The PCs could afford to be broader. Now, the Ontario Liberals, a completely different story. A much, much smarter investment approach, you could say, in terms of targeting.
Okay, how's...
They really honed in. They focused their significant budget on specific geographic areas, key postal codes where they thought they had a real shot. They used interest-based targeting, aiming for voters in places like Toronto, Ottawa, parts of the GTA areas with traditional Liberal support, or identified as key swing districts.
So targeted messaging for specific urban and suburban voters.
Right. And while they didn't win the election overall, you saw the results. Increased vote share, those surprise seat pickups we mentioned, it clearly had an impact. And get this, on election eve, they made a huge last-minute push, dropped $172,000 on ads in just one day.
Wow, 172K in 24 hours. That sounds intense. A bit desperate maybe, or just hyper strategic?
Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah.
A real go-for-broke move in those absolutely critical ridings, trying to capture any last undecideds.
Did it work enough to justify that cost? I mean, they didn't win government.
Well, enough is subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
It certainly helped push their vote share up and likely contributed to those extra seats, securing that official party status.
Yep.
It didn't flip the election, no, but it shows a deep understanding of micro-targeting, knowing exactly where to put your money for maximum impact on specific local races.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the NDP? They spent much less.
Far less. But they were incredibly efficient. Their strategy was all about maximizing return on investment, ROI,
How did they manage that?
by focusing ruthlessly on their core ridings. Places where they knew they had strong support or a good chance, they spent consistently throughout the campaign, not just in bursts. This built a solid presence in their key postal codes. And look at the outcome. They won nearly double the seats the Liberals did, despite spending just a fraction of the Liberal budget.
That's remarkable efficiency. So where did they focus?
Strongholds, urban districts, select rural areas like Northern Ontario, working-class ridings in Toronto, places where their message resonates most strongly. They made their smaller budget punch above its weight.
And the Greens, similar approach.
Very similar, actually. Consistent, targeted, just with an even smaller budget than the NDP. They used interest-based ads in areas with strong local support, places like Parry Sound, Muskoka, where they saw potential.
And it paid off for them, too.
Absolutely. Look at their historic wins in Gulf and Kitchener Center, huge margins. It really proves that smart, consistent, targeted spending can be incredibly effective, even if you don't have the biggest bank account.
It really does seem like a case of quality over quantity here, especially for the NDP and Greens, making every dollar count.
Definitely.
Okay, so they figured out who to target. But what were they actually saying? What were the messages in these digital campaigns? What issues were they trying to connect with you, the voter, on?
Right, the creative strategy. And this ties directly back to the targeting. The Ontario Liberals, for example, really hammered on healthcare.
Healthcare, okay. Anything specific?
Yes, mental health services were a big focus in their ads. They clearly saw that as a key concern for the voters they were targeting. And they combined that with quite pointed attack ads against Premier Ford's leadership, trying to frame him as ineffective, particularly on the economy.
So hitting on service delivery and leadership competence, trying to energize their base and maybe sway some undecideds in those target writings.
Exactly. Then you had the PCs. Their narrative was quite different, more about protection.
Protection from what?
External threats mainly. Things like Trump tariffs, the shaky global economy.
Yeah.
They really tried to make economic insecurity the core issue.
Positioning themselves as the steady hand in uncertain times.
That was the idea. A message designed for that broad spray and pray reach. Interestingly, they also ran attack ads, but aimed at Bonnie Crombie, painting her leadership as divisive, a sort of counterattack to the Liberal strategy.
Okay, and the NDP, what was their angle?
They took a broader approach, hitting multiple issues relevant to their base. Housing affordability was big, also affordable health care, workers' rights. And they definitely didn't shy away from highlighting controversies under Ford, like the Greenbelt issue and the RCMP investigation.
So, questioning integrity while offering solutions on bread and butter issues aimed at their core urban and working class voters.
You got it, trying to present a comprehensive alternative. And finally, the Greens. They echoed some ND key points on healthcare and housing, but they put a much stronger emphasis on rural communities, promoting their local candidates there. And of course, environmental issues were front and center.
Right, playing to their strengths and local focus.
And positioning themselves clearly against controversial government policies. Their creative was really tailored to appeal to both their environmental base and voters looking for strong local representation, especially in those ridings where they saw potential, like Guelph and Kitchener Center.
It's really fascinating how the message and the targeting have to work hand in hand. You can't just shout into the void. It seems the big takeaway from this deep dive is pretty clear. Effective targeting, smart strategy, compelling creative that matters way more than just the total amount of money you throw at digital ads.
Absolutely. Being the loudest doesn't mean you're the most effective.
It's about precision.
It really is. The PC's broad approach gave them visibility, sure,
Yeah.
but the Liberals, NDP, and Greens all showed in different ways that smarter, focused spending leads to better engagement, better conversions, especially if you're not the incumbent.
Reaching the right people with the right message at the right moment.
That's the game. And it's not just a trend. This is the future of campaigning. We're only going to see more sophisticated use of social media, more micro-targeting, more personalization. Social media truly has become the new battleground. There's no question about it.
It really changed everything. So a final thought for you listening. As you think about all this, the spending, the targeting, the messages, how might understanding these digital strategies change how you see political ads next time around? Will you start looking past the surface message and thinking about the strategic intent behind why you specifically are seeing that particular ad? Something to consider. Subscribe for more insights and visit EOKconsults.com to learn more and stay in touch.